Sandy says, "Oh, cool, I have Dr. Joe on my TV." Oh, sorry, for a moment there, I forgot I was live. So I am here. Here I am. Thank you for coming. Hi, Sandy. I take it you have me on YouTube on your TV? Kay says hi all, and Dolores says hi all. Okay, please share and help me out there. Well, Sandy must be watching this on Facebook on her TV, because my feed says she's on Facebook. And Deborah says, hello. Hi, Deborah. How are you? I see folks are starting to arrive. Okay, so what I want to start with tonight, I want to cover three things. Some news on vaccine, producing more vaccines. And news on what's been going on with GameStop. Yeah, we have Roku too. And we watch our YouTube, okay, on Roku, and we even watch Amazon Prime on, on Roku too, which is kind of funny. Anyway, so then I want to talk about what's been going on with GameStop and the run on the big players on the stock market by the small players, and what this all means. And then I want to end by talking about COVID relief, things like that. So let's get to some of the news on those subjects. So I'm sharing a piece from today for you from the American Prospect by Dave Dayen, first 100 column. Headline, Biden could force drug makers to produce approved vaccines. Well, of course, we've known that from the start, but Dave joined the call yesterday from President Biden's COVID response team about the state of the rollout of the vaccines. And Jeffrey Zients, who's the response coordinator, led the call. Dave says, the big takeaway for me was an indication that the White House is, quote, actively exploring the idea of compelling other pharmaceutical manufacturers under the Defense Production Act to produce approved coronavirus vaccines from Moderna and Pfizer. Until now, the expectation was that the DPA was being used to accelerate a production of supplies, like the syringes that can get 6 shots out of a Pfizer vial, or maybe material ingredients that are used in the production of the vaccines. Also masks, and test kits. But on this call, they were talking about something beyond that, a step further. And, quote, whether or not a factory can be retrofitted to produce another vaccine, that's under active exploration, said Andy Slavitt, the senior advisor for the COVID response team. Quote again, will not be afraid to explore every option, unquote. Zients reinforced that He said, quote, "This is a national emergency. Anything we can do to increase vaccine supply and timing of the delivery is on the table, and we will execute accordingly." This is welcome and long overdue news. Whenever I talk about getting these plants converted, I get snickers from people who say, "I don't know anything about this type of production." Dave says then, "But I can read a calendar. The coronavirus genome was only mapped out in January. Actual production of the vaccines was starting once the phase 3 trials got going in September and October. We know that starting from scratch, you can get to production in far less than a year. Since nobody expects the world to have every vaccine it needs in that time frame, then there's really an imperative to do this. And the right frame is, quote, the world, unquote. If developing countries are still suffering with this, then it affects us. Even if you're just a crass capitalist, it affects the goods you can sell into a country that's in a lockdown situation. And it raises the possibility of a mutation and a resumption of the virus, which, as we've seen, doesn't take much to rocket around the world. We need everyone on the planet covered, and we have a handful of vaccines that work and can allow us to live our lives again. We need to make as much as we can now. There's already a model for this. Sanofi, the French, the drug maker Sanofi has agreed to produce Pfizer vaccines at one of their facilities in Frankfurt. Since the vaccine they've been testing has hit delays. That's only for the European market. But it shows that, yes, you can retrofit factories to produce other vaccines. But we shouldn't wait for drug companies to figure that out and build partnerships. Under the DPA, we can compel companies to make that changeover. That's what Biden is exploring. And frankly, we're way late to do this. As soon as vaccines like Pfizer and Moderna showed promising stage 2 results, we should have moved to this changeover. That could have given enough time to get more supply by this spring. Even if one of the vaccines that you were able to mass produce washed out, who cares? That small waste of money pales in comparison to the economic loss from a slower vaccination campaign. On Tuesday, the White House announced it would purchase enough Pfizer and Moderna doses to cover every U.S. adult over 16 by the end of summer. The response team, in saying this, is not including Johnson & Johnson, which is close to seeking approval. Actually, today it was announced that it seems close to getting approval. Okay, nor does it include the AstraZeneca vaccine in their calculations. 2 other vaccines very close to approval here. AstraZeneca, of course, is already being used in the UK and in some nations in Europe. But there's less to that announcement than meets the eye. It's actually just working to get additional doses in the second quarter of the year. There's no guarantee that Pfizer and Moderna have the capacity to produce, though they have agreed, there was news today, to produce another 200 million vaccines between them. With the earlier agreements to get to 100 vaccines, that means their commitments now for 300 million vaccines to be produced, not counting Johnson and Johnson, not counting AstraZeneca, but Johnson and Johnson is a one-shot vaccine. It's not a two-shot vaccine. So that will speed things up even more. Speaking of no guarantees, says Dave, 2/3 of the allotment in Oklahoma earmarked for the CVS Walgreens plan to get shots to nursing home facilities are still frozen. Read Matt Stoller on how monopoly pharmacies and others are slowing the rollout. And there's a link to Matt Stoller's piece in this piece. Other news from that press call, Andy Slavitt said the federal government will only maintain a rolling inventory of 2 to 3 days of supply, getting as much out to the states as possible. They're boosting allocations by 16% and locking that in for 3 weeks so states know how much they're getting and can plan. This was a major reason for the slowness of the rollout. Nobody can make appointments with uncertain supply. There will be 100, quote, community vaccination centers, unquote, rolled out in the next month, including mobile clinics. There will also be a partnership with the community health centers, thanks to Bernie Sanders that those exist even, by the way, which are located often in hard-to-reach areas. By thanking Bernie Sanders there, actually, what I meant is this is a referral to the compromise that he got during the negotiations of the Affordable Care Act. In return for his vote, he got some money in the Affordable Care Act to create community health centers, which still exist today and could be used to help to distribute the vaccine, to get the vaccine into people's arms. All of this costs money, says Dave, and it's a big reason why we need to patch at least the vaccine funding of the American Rescue Plan as soon as humanly possible. As the Federal Reserve stated yesterday, this is the main determinant of the economy and more important of hundreds of thousands of lives. You can't throw enough money at this. So this is what the Fed said. So the Fed knows it, and that is wonderful. I hope Janet Yellen also knows it, but I wish the Republicans in the Senate would know it too. So Dave says, Kay, in the next section, which will lead us into the transition as we go forward here, that he couldn't help himself. So he did a GameStop take, which he links to and which we'll get to in just a few minutes. And he says he concurs with good reads from Ryan Cooper, Zach Carter, and Doug Henwood that this escapade in the stock market exposes the stock market for all its artifice and corruption. Hedge fund types were able to manipulate the market all to themselves for so long, and they can't stand the competition. And the idea of value, of what a value stocks and what's not, is an amorphous and disconnected concept that depends on the muscle behind the gambling bet made when the big players sell stocks short. Dave says here, it does look like a lot of institutional players are making a lot of money off this uprising. Most disturbingly, Citadel. They're one of the big players in the flow of money aspect of hedge fund trading. and some of the personal connections between Citadel and the short sellers, okay, in this area, okay, in GameStop, are also very disturbing, as we'll get to, okay, in just a couple of minutes. But anyway, they are making a lot of money off of the uprising. That is the attempt through the Robinhood trading platform and some other trading platforms of small investors to impose penalties on the big traders to rebel against the short selling, okay, of GameStop, okay, and other stocks. And so today, Robinhood was locking out traders in key stocks today, actually preventing the buying of key stocks, showing, as Dave says, that they're democratized the market, quote unquote. Their rhetoric about this was just only rhetoric. This whole thing will require rethinking of the market and how schemes like pump and dump are regulated. Fortunately, the person in the position most equipped to do that is Gary Gensler, the incoming head of the Securities and Exchange Commission, who has just the right attitude for the task. In his last go-around as a regulator of Wall Street, he was unafraid of sticking it to the suits, and he will have every opportunity to do so again. There may be a role for Rohit Chopra's Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, specifically on Robinhood 2. The spotlight on the Wall Street casino looms large. Let's not waste this moment. So, let's now share the Ryan Cooper article on GameStop for some more background on this. That's from The Week. And it goes something like this. It's a fairly short piece. The business press and many ordinary Americans have been transfixed watching the stock of GameStop soar into the stratosphere. Yes, the stratosphere. What did I do? I inadvertently closed the Cooper article. So here it is again. Oh no, I didn't inadvertently close it. I'm sorry. I just didn't recognize that I had it here. So anyway, at the time of writing, its price had leaped to well over $300, driven in part by an army of by Redditors making an organized attack against Wall Street hedge funds who had bet against the company. That is, they were short selling the GameStop in quantities that exceeded the amount of stock that GameStop had out there. In the context of an extractive financial sector, this is hilariously satisfying, says Ryan. But it also makes the case for root and branch financial reform. But reckless gambling and wild speculation is not a great foundation for a prosperous and stable economy. Here's what's happening. GameStop is a classic brick and mortar retailer that has struggled against online competition. Its long-term prospects have only gotten worse during the pandemic because people don't want to leave their homes and shop for fear of catching COVID-19. Thus, Wall Street traders had bet heavily against the company, expecting it to declare bankruptcy soon, which puts still more financial pressure on it. To bet against the stock, you typically short it. This means you borrow the stock and then sell it. With an agreement, you will return it at a later date. If the price goes down, then when you buy back the stock, you pay less unless you pocket a quick profit. Wall Street was so confident GameStop was toast that more than its entire outstanding stock had been sold short, possibly because of reshorting shares that had already been shorted once. However, shorting involves some risk. If the price goes up instead of down, then you pay more than you originally did and you lose money. The higher the price, the more you lose. And if the price goes up a lot, you might be forced to buy it back. Short sales typically have a due date, and so short sellers may calculate that it's better to get out now to avoid still greater losses, or their creditors might demand they do it for fear that mounting losses will drive them into bankruptcy. So the Redditors plotted a classic, quote, short squeeze, unquote, using day trader services like the Robinhood and also TD Ameritrade. The idea was to dive in and buy all at once to drive up the price, causing the shorts to take losses. The higher it went, the more shorts would get spooked or be forced to sell, causing them to buy the stock back and drive the price even higher. See the beauty of this, it spirals upward. But this time it was the Redditors, the small investors, that were driving one of these things, not the big hedge funds, okay, on Wall Street. This cycle can feed on itself because as the price rises, others will be tempted to jump in and short the stock. If GameStop was arguably overvalued at $40 per share, it is surely overvalued at $300. But then if the squeezes are determined, organized, and have enough cash, they can keep driving the price up and rinsing the shorts, at least for a while. And that at least is how this all started. I think I would have actually preferred to say hosing the shorts in that last sentence. As Elizabeth Lopato explains at The Verge, the actual process was a bit more complicated than this because a lot of the Redditors were trading options to buy stocks instead of actual stocks. But that doesn't change the basic mechanics. On one level, this is all very funny and richly deserved. The hedge fund, the Melvin Capital, had to be bailed out by its competitors and reportedly ended up booking a $3.75 billion loss. Another famous short seller, Andrew Left, can't believe that name, Andrew Left, tried to bet against the stock and ended up running for his life. These hedge funds are some of the most ruthless and extractive companies on Wall Street, and ones who specialize in short selling often deliberately cause the business failures they are supposedly predicting, destroying productive businesses and laying off thousands of people for a quick buck. It is deeply satisfying to see some of them get pantsed by unsophisticated, quote unquote, normal people using the exact same coordination and media pressure tactics they constantly use themselves. There was a lot of Schadenfreude that was running around here. Schadenfreude, not quite, Schadenfreude, not quite sure how to pronounce that. But on another level, this is an indication of how warped and socially destructive the financial sector is. For one thing, it was not just the Redditors raking in cash on all this. These day trader apps can let ordinary people trade for free because they contract with other Wall Street firms to actually fill the orders. The fact that companies like Citadel Securities or Virtu actually pay a large premium to fulfill the orders, the Robinhood orders, is evidence many of its users are getting rooked. Then, with all the attention to this story, other professional traders and ultra wealthy investors are certainly getting in on the action and possibly make up the majority of it by now. Other financial firms got a huge benefit just by virtue of what they happen to own. The gigantic asset manager BlackRock has long owned 13% of GameStop, and they may have netted something like $2.4 billion with a quick sale. Okay, and amusingly, the government of Norway also owns 2.6% of GameStop. For another, while a lot of Redditors are gleefully posting their gains or, quote, tendies, TENDIES, unquote, as they say, God bless them, GameStop is definitely not going to remain at $300 forever. No, it went up to something like $349 or $354. But what Ryan says is eventually it will nosedive, and if history is any guide, quite a few naive or unlucky people will end up losing their shirts. But most importantly, all this wild speculation profiteering is not fundamentally different from what Wall Street is doing all the time. Contrary to the economic textbooks, the stock market does not have much to do with actual business investments, even if the occasional company might raise some money there. As Henwood has shows in his classic book, Wall Street, the great bulk of business investment is, quote, internally financed through profits and depreciation allowances. On net, shareholders take more money out of companies than they put in them, which is interesting. I didn't know that. Indeed, over the years, whole economic sectors have turned themselves inside out, disgorging cash into the shareholder gullet. He says, our bloated financial sector is associated with a lower rate of overall business investment than in peer nations today or our own prior history. The U.S. was a much more equal and prosperous place when Wall Street was clapped in regulatory irons and the economy was a lot more stable. It is momentarily glorious to see arrogant hedge fund guys get beaten at their own game. But the fact is that the Wall Street casino is rigged. The average person will almost always be beaten by the big, deep-pocketed players, particularly if he or she can't even afford to buy stock, which is the case for most Americans. If we strictly regulated Wall Street with large capital requirements, a financial transactions tax, simply banning most of the complicated derivatives and options used today and so on, aimed not at the retail investor, but mainly at the big financial firms, the American economy would be a lot healthier. If we scoop most stocks into a social wealth fund owned equally by every American, normal people could benefit from the market without having to take crazy risks. There are better ways to beat the rich than pump and dump schemes. Why did he say pump and dump schemes? Because the small investors' activity here on Robinhood and on TD America, okay, and the others, or TD Trade, or whatever it's called, what they're doing is a classic pump and dump scheme, but it's getting done from the bottom up rather than from the top down. At least that's what they originally intended. However, something happened today, and that was a case where the elites were doing the dumping. And I'm afraid quite a few of the small investors probably got caught in that. and we'll get to that in just a moment. So here's another article by Dave Dayen. Oh, I haven't really shared it yet, so let me share it for you. Share the screen. Yes, share my damn screen. So this is Dave's take. He decided to get into the columnist act on GameStop. He was resisting it, but it was too juicy for him to leave it alone. So he ginned up a column. Pretty good one, actually. It's called "The GameStop Craziness Pulls Back the Curtain on the Stock Market." I think he stole that title from a line by Ryan Cooper that I just went through, right? But he did have a little different twist on it. He said, about a decade ago, we first heard the phrase "Occupy Wall Street," quote unquote, which referred to groups of young people fed up with a rigged economic system taking over a small park in lower Manhattan and demanding an economy that works for everyone and not just the 1%. It had a short shelf life as police in paramilitary mode dismantled the encampments. And they were encampments because there were in places all over America, including here in Washington, D.C., there were actually 2 encampments. And that was very interesting. They lasted for some time. And life went on. It went on until the past couple of weeks where we've discovered yet another meaning for, quote, "Occupy Wall Street," unquote. A group of online investing enthusiasts congregating on the subreddit message board and armed with the app-based trading device, the Robinhood, have busted into the Wall Street gambling hall and reduced the balance sheets of some well-established financial players to smoldering ruins. Did you get that image? They did this through brute force, bidding up stocks that Wall Street had left for dead. In so doing, they used approximately the same tactics as the big money boys to intimidate and pummel the competition. They've also revealed the public stock markets as essentially artificial, essentially markets where anyone with capital behind them can just decide something has value. These are not free markets. They're markets dominated by those with capital. They're using this power to pummel hedge fund short sellers who gladly use the same tactics whenever it can help them. It's one of the most hilarious bits of poetic justice I've seen in the past decade, says Dave. He says, I'll briefly explain the situation. There's a subreddit, essentially a message board called r/Wall Street bets. We're bored. Quarantined day traders have been congregating. They have a mischievous bent. Quote, like 4chan found the Bloomberg terminal, unquote, is the motto of that subreddit. And at some point, they came up with the idea to coordinate buying of individual low-cost stocks as a way to turn a profit. The first big one they identified was GameStop, a retail outlet where customers can rent video games. Given the depressing state of retail generally, GameStop wasn't doing all that well, not as a business, not as a stock. 4 weeks ago, it started the year at about $17 a share. And the quote, smart money on Wall Street, meaning institutional investors like hedge funds, had placed their bet on GameStop. They expected it to go down and put billions of dollars toward that end on so-called short bets. Short is in quotes there. The short sellers hadn't anticipated the Robinhood guys, however, because a stock like GameStop doesn't trade very much. You can just drive a lot of purchase into it. You can really move the market. Some Robinhood accounts allowed for margin trading, which means a trader can use borrowed money to purchase shares, adding to the overall amounts. And in the ease of trading, the quote, the YOLO, YOLO in caps, unquote, you only live once mentality of the traders and the internet's boundless tendency to make things go viral, and the GameStop gambit quickly grew into a frenzy. On January 12th, the buying spree began, distributed among thousands of traders. By January 13th, GameStop was at $31. The next day, $39. On January 22nd, it leaped. That was only 6 days ago, folks. It leaped to $65. 4 days later, it hit, that was the 26th, right? 4 days later, January 22nd, January 26th, it hit 147. By the end of trading on Wednesday, which again was January 27th, it closed at $347 a share. An almost impossible run. That's good news for these traders and good news for GameStop, which certainly can use the newfound surge in the stock price to its advantage. And GameStop isn't the only beneficiary. AMC Entertainment, BlackBerry, and Bed Bath & Beyond are among the other YOLO stocks, you only live once stocks. On Wednesday, shares in Tootsie Roll, yes, you can apparently buy stock in the Tootsie Roll company, jumped 53% at one point. I haven't eaten a Tootsie Roll in years. The only losers at this point are the shorts. If you bet on a stock to go up and it doesn't, you lose some of the money you put into that stock. If you bet on the stock to go down, every time it goes up, you lose more and more money. A hedge fund known as Melvin Capital, which made heavy bets against GameStop, lost $3 billion of its assets under management in about a week, and pulled out of its position. It means it sold all of the short sale stocks. In other words, all the stocks it had borrowed, it sold to get out of the market on that stock because it was afraid of even more losses than the $3 billion. So it had to fold. Hedge fund pals, Citadel and Point72 decided to prop up poor Melvin, the hobbled financier, investing billions to save it. Gabe Plotkin, the founder of Melvin Capital, used to work at the predecessor to Point72. Business journalists have reported that other hedge funds with ill-fated short bets are in similar trouble. Most of these firms use borrowed money to make short bets. And there's an entire industry known as securities lending with an inventory of stocks to facilitate those trades. They could suffer as well. This is, and there's no other way to put it, hilarious. But there are a bunch of people trading stocks on their phones have brought some of the lords of finance to their knees. They weren't using some amazing or novel strategy. The run-up in GameStop is just the pump, quote unquote, of a pump and dump scheme where hype pulls people into a stock before the rug gets pulled out. In fact, that's what hedge fund managers do all the time, making bets and using research to puff up a stock, then taking the profits off moving a stock through force of will, theirs, rather than the inherent value of the company. The only real difference here is that ordinary investors are driving the train and the hedge fund guys are getting run over. The hedge funders are mad because distorting corporate stock prices beyond the fundamentals is supposed to be their thing, not the work of the hoi polloi. Now they've been outfoxed. If you can think of a better use of $600 stimulus checks, let me know. I can think of a better use. Never was there a more apt name for an app in this moment than Robin Hood, quote unquote. Now, this will not stay hilarious forever. We still have the dump part of the pump and dump scheme, and there appears to be a lot of institutional money front running the whole thing, capitalizing on the populist storyline to take their winnings. But that's why this can also be a teachable moment and a moment to fully re-regulate this entire casino. The idea that the stock market value represents a snapshot of a company's true worth or expected future profits was always a little cockeyed. And now it's just been revealed as absurd. Financial market rigging was always discreetly lurking in the background of stock tickers, like the one that flashes across CNBC, and now it's been screamingly placed into the foreground. The same dopamine rush that fuels sports betting and online poker has moved into retail market trading, but it was always there at the level of big money. These markets were always reckless and disconnected from the reality. I'm certain that institutional investors will use this moment but to demand the regulation to stop the Robin Hood frenzy. And they did that. They did that today. They were demanding regulation on CNBC. People who hate regulation and always talk against it were demanding regulation. Dave goes on. But that's a slippery slope, as there's not much difference between what the Robin Hooders are doing and the normal course of Wall Street looting. Maybe all of that should be investigated. Maybe financial transaction taxes should be applied to encourage limits on trading and pump and dump strongly restricted. Maybe the real economy should be nurtured with public investment and these private, more corrupt types of markets subject to root and branch overhaul. It's also funny to see the hedge fund guys super mad that a stock is going up. GameStop and those other companies really don't have much of a future. And if those fundamentals mean anything, at some point, the bottom will fall out. As righteous as it is, I don't think app trading heralds some new dawn for our economy. But you can see it as the inevitable byproduct of a system built on massive inequality. The little guys figured out how to band together and stick it to the big guys. In so doing, they protected retail companies with lots of workers who now get a reprieve, however brief. They revealed the rot in our system, essentially took over Wall Street and made a lot of rich and amoral people cry. I'm going along for the ride, says Dave. That was a very nicely written rant, wasn't it? A really good one. He told that story very, very well. Let's go on. Yet another on that particular story. I wouldn't be paying so much attention to it, but the implications for re-regulation of the market are really substantial. They're really substantial because people are going to remember that. Billions of dollars were lost in this. So this one's by John Kelly at Common Dreams. And it was done today. And it starts with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez saying, quote, anyway, tax the rich. Concluded Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in her brief Twitter assessment of the ongoing saga. What's important to know, wrote Left Business Observer editor Doug Henwood, is that the whole episode, quote, is, quote, is is, quote, a lesson in the absurdity and the uselessness of the stock market. More crucially, journalist and author Jacob Silverman for the New Republic, is that what has transpired thus far, quote, shows how casino capitalism is eating the world. And there's a quote here from Zach Carter as well. Let's see if it appears later in this. Well, just in case it doesn't, I'll quote it here now. Financial markets cannot tell us what is good and what is bad. They can only tell us what a lot of people thought they could make money on at a certain point in time. Zach Carter of HuffPost said that. But there's a little more to this. Because people in it are saying, okay, on YouTube, that for the little investors in there, it's not so much about actually making money. What it's about is screwing the big players. What it's about is rebellion against what the stock market normally does and the advantages that the big players have. So the opinion of these people who are participating in it, okay, is that many of the small investors who are in on it are fully prepared to lose their whole stake, whether it's $100, $200, $300, or whatever it may be, or might have been to start to buy the stock and to gamble in the stock. They were in it for the trouble it would cause, not in it for the money they could make. That's not to say that some people did not make money. Speaking of eating, one participant, going back to the article this is, with her husband had already made an estimated $1,700 as of Wednesday by helping boost the stock, which has sent the financial world into a tizzy this week. She said there was a, quote, catharsis to actually making money, unquote, off the pain of Wall Street titans who have done the same to average Americans for decades and didn't feel bad about it for a second. Quote, eat the rich, unquote, she said in an interview with the New York Times. And the topic at hand, of course, is GameStop, which has the stock ticker symbol GME, which is now at the center of the fiasco. And we talked about the subreddit page, the Wall Street Bets page. And there's a quote from Bob Reich here. Quote, Wall Street and stock market are metaphors for a society rotting from self-indulgence, greed, widening inequality, and financial entrepreneurship that builds nothing, improves nothing, creates nothing, and solves nothing, but merely moves money from one set of pockets to another, unquote. That was from a tweet, okay, by Reich. And as Silverman explained in his piece for TNR on Wednesday, but TNR is a New Republic, GME opened at $354.83 on Wednesday. That's when it opened. An increase of almost $200 from its previous close. Actually, I think it was more than $200 because I thought its previous close was $147, if I have that right. In the last few days, hundreds of millions of shares have changed hands, snapped up by both Reddit day traders and big hedge funds, who have been forced to buy more shares to cover their short positions. On Tuesday, it was the most traded stock in America. While pundits search for explanations, large investors are scrambling to stem their losses. Being on the wrong side of a short position can lead to a vicious cycle. And as you know, the Melvin Capital Company, one of the hedge funds, received a bailout of nearly $3 billion from Point72, a fund owned by Steve Cohen, who also owns the New York Mets. With that money, Melvin would later manage to extricate itself and close out its position, but not without suffering what may have been several billions of dollars, in losses. And I believe the figure earlier quoted in one of the other articles was 3.75 billion in losses for Melvin. A financial head scratcher for many not familiar with short selling and stock puts, but not to mention the subreddits and popular day trader apps like the Robinhood app, on which much of the amateur trading is taking place. And so progressive critics argue that what the whole kerfuffle represents is just how far detached the stock market is from the actual economy. As Henwood put it, quote, "Who knew GameStop would itself become such a game?" This drama, like the seemingly endless rise in stock prices since 2009, interrupted briefly by the COVID scare last month, he wrote in his piece for Jacobin, is a sign of a financial system totally out of touch with economic reality. And Ocasio-Cortez tweeted a little by Schadenfreude about this. And Hedwin had this to say in a quote: "Bubbles like this always end in a crash, and but those Redditors who haven't sold their shares will be left holding a very depleted bag. In the meanwhile, it's funny to see some Wall Streeters complain there's something unfair about this action, since these are the sorts of games they play with each other and the general public all the time. They talk up stocks or talk them down, depending on their interests, and plot against what they see as weak or vulnerable players all the time. It's just that the speculators with names like Deep Fucking Value, who are savaging them for now, are the wrong kind of people. But they don't live, in Greenwich, Connecticut, in houses with 20-car garages." In a newsletter post Thursday morning, former Wall Street professional Alexis Goldstein, who, by the way, had a really hilarious newsletter on this, that's worth reading, but I won't have time tonight, said that while many have framed the story as a David versus a Goliath situation, in which the Reddit people had outsmarted the institutional cretins of Wall Street, the dynamics are more complicated, than that. Goldstein writes, "Is this really Robinhood sticking it to Wall Street? The answer is no." She says, "Given the amount of firepower that larger investors have over the amateur day traders who are using apps like the Robinhood app, including massive information collection operations and the ability to utilize lightning-fast trading algorithms," she argues that while some financial titans might have lost their shirts, others were there to claim massive profits. This isn't hedge funds versus retail traders. It's hedge funds versus other hedge funds. And she points out, that BlackRock during this entire thing made approximately $2.4 billion, perhaps as much as $1.2 billion this month alone. This doesn't mean that it's a bad thing that some of the Reddit guys decided to own a guy who named his amoral investing company after his dead grandfather Melvin into the sun. But it does mean that in the grand scheme of things, the house is doing just fine, and indeed could blow the whole thing up, at any moment. Indeed, on Thursday morning, after early trading showed a GameStop price that continued to soar Robinhood intervened by preventing its customers from making new orders on the company, as well as other similarly soaring purchases for the AMC movie chain, for BlackBerry, and others. In other words, users could no longer buy GameStop to drive the price up. No longer could buy GameStop or BlackBerry or Nokia stock. So, of course, if people can no longer buy the stock, then what happens? What happens? They can sell. They can liquidate their positions. But they cannot continue to push up the stock. Not only that, since they can't continue to buy the stock, and since the stock is then being sold by people who are involved in the short selling and who are now selling to liquidate, their positions, the action by Robinhood is essentially an action which causes the stock value to collapse, which is all right for the people trying to liquidate, because they're then able to buy the stock at a lower price and have a better chance of liquidating their positions and not suffering as serious losses, as they might have. But it also collapses the market for the small investors suddenly and over the period of today when they stopped the trading, buying the stock. It denied the small investors and other hedge fund users the opportunity to continue to drive that stock up. And not only that, by collapsing the value of the stock, it deprived them of the profits that they might otherwise, have gotten. So Robinhood decided to intervene in the market by stopping the trading, and they caused damages to their customers then as a result of that action. I think they're on the hook for serious legal action for taking that action. They held out that this was a market thing, a stock market thing, a free market thing. And the small investors were relying on that to perform their strategy, which is not illegal right now on Wall Street, and which the big players had been doing again and again and again to harm the small investors and harm the public. And basically, what was done by Robinhood here was to take the side of the big investors to limit their losses and limit the gains that were possible for the small investors, destroying the value of the stocks they had bought in minutes, by changing the market conditions, by stopping people from further buying of the stock. So Rashida Tlaib said, this is beyond insane. Democrats on the Financial Services Committee, she added, quote, need to have a hearing on Robinhood's market manipulation. They're blocking the ability to trade to protect Wall Street hedge funds, stealing millions of dollars from their users to protect people who've used the stock market as a casino for decades, unquote. Yes, that's what they did, and they did it under the name of Robinhood, which they used to pull the small investors in to engage in these activities in the first place. But suddenly they stopped robbing from the rich to give to the poor and decided to rob the poor to give back to the rich. Of course, they would always do that, right? Always stick with their own, in the end. And by the way, what was actually enabling them to make a profit was the deal they had with Citadel. But Citadel was basically handling their flow before them, and allowing them to make profits on that flow. And Citadel, meanwhile, was making money on all the stocks that they were trading, with them acting, okay, as middlemen. So Citadel was making huge quantities of money, okay, and Robinhood was making money from the flows to Citadel's, and they decided to shut it all down. By the way, Citadel was among those companies that bailed out the Melvin Capital Company. They were among the companies that put up the $3 billion to save Melvin Capital and to save this guy Plotkin. Why did they want to save Plotkin? The real story is that they thought that Plotkin was a genius trader in spite of what happened to him. He used to work for them, and they wanted him back. So they basically bailed out and took what I believe are controlling shares in his company. So they bailed out a company that had just had $3 billion in losses so they could get Plotkin back trading for them. That's basically what it amounts to. So, here's a further quote from Zach Carter in this case. The real work of determining what kind of world we want to live in is the proper subject of democracy, not high finance. The Redditors have made this brazenly clear to the world, and for that they should be celebrated rather than condemned. The situation, however, does demand a public policy solution. The Redditors have revealed an absurdity by being absurd. The appropriate response is not to demand an orgy of further absurdity, but to do something sensible. So what would be the sensible solution? In a statement late Wednesday, Senator Warren jumped into the concern over GameStop and called on the Securities and Exchange Commission to intervene. Though vague in what exactly must be done, Warren said, quote, "With stocks soaring while millions are out of work and struggling to pay bills, it's not news that the stock market doesn't reflect our actual economy," unquote. For years, the same hedge funds, private equity firms, and wealthy investors dismayed by the GameStop trades have treated the stock market like their own personal casino while everyone else pays the price. It's long past time for the SEC and other financial regulators to wake up and do their jobs. And with a new administration and Democrats running Congress, I intend to make sure they do. Carter, however, Zach Carter, was more specific in his prescription. The simplest solution, he wrote, I'll quote again, is a financial transactions tax, a small fee attached to every financial bet. This tax will either discourage reckless stock betting and reduce the volume of what is mostly economical, wasteful activity, or generate a great deal of revenue that can be devoted to more useful activities. Well, that can only happen if the financial transactions tax is at the state level, because as we know, taxation at the federal level doesn't generate any more revenue. So I think that Zach Carter, who's very well aware of that, sort of misspoke a little bit here. But, of course, what such taxes can do is siphon off a great deal, okay, of unneeded wealth from the rich that undermines our democracy. So from that point of view, it is very useful. So, as a final quote from Silverman, at TNR, quote, "The financialization of the U.S. economy over the last 40 years has been a disaster for most Americans, bringing income inequality, recessions, a housing crisis, and the impression, probably justified, that the economy simply doesn't work for them. It is indeed a giant casino, and like any casino, it's rigged to the benefit of the operators and their partners. No wonder watching hedge funds scramble to cover their positions brings out a perverse pleasure in small-time day traders and socialists alike," unquote. Absolutely. So, on to relief, COVID relief. So this is by Jake Johnson today. As White House floats skimpier relief bill in bid for GOP support, but progressives warn going small would be catastrophic. Of course we have. And there's a picture, of Jayapal warning. No, I guess that's from December 12th. But she warned, though, today that it would be catastrophic. The progressives sent a letter. These were people from the CPC. The letter was signed by Jayapal, by Deputy Chair of the CPC, Katie Porter. I thought that I guess there must be a vice chair, and a deputy chair. I guess the vice chair, is Ro Khanna, I believe. And probably there's a deputy chair, that's probably Katie Porter. The caucus whip, is Ilhan Barbara Lee signed also, and 21 other lawmakers. So 1, 2, 3, 4, that's 25 people from the CPC signed this particular letter. We are concerned by the views of some in Congress who are advocating for a scaled-back wait-and-see approach. The letter states it alludes to the bipartisan group of lawmakers that the White House economic team has sought out for input on coronavirus relief in recent days. That's the Gang of 16. A gang of 8 from the Democratic side and a gang of 8 from the Republican side. Despite warnings that outreach to austerity-obsessed Republicans is both futile and dangerous. Quote from the letter, "This goes against both the economic consensus and the voices of our constituents who are crying out for additional relief to keep food on their tables and a roof over their heads. The families and small businesses that make up the economy do not have the luxury of waiting to see how this public health and economic crisis progresses. They need relief now," unquote. Pointing to the Obama administration's woefully inadequate response to the Great Recession, as a cautionary tale, the progressive lawmakers cautioned that, quote, "If we do not act now, a prolonged, sluggish economic recovery will surely result," unquote. And the letter goes on to reject an overemphasis on targeting aid, such as the $1,400 direct relief payments Biden has proposed. As Common Dreams are reported Wednesday, growing chorus of right-wing lawmakers from both parties is pushing the president to further restrict eligibility for the checks in order to deny relief to those who supposedly, quote, don't need it, unquote. The letter says Congress should err on the side of offering generous relief to a larger pool of people rather than too little. The cost of doing too little too slowly far outweighs the concerns about a relatively small share of households getting too much. And meanwhile, Politico has indicated that the Biden administration is considering breaking its proposed coronavirus bill into two parts in a bid to win GOP support for at least one part. According to Politico, a bipartisan deal would have skimpier funding for state and local relief, if any, and less money for vaccine distribution, unemployment insurance, and nutritional assistance, or SNAP. Less money for vaccine distribution is certainly killing people, isn't it? It's certainly going to result in deaths. It just is unacceptable. Less money for unemployment insurance might result in deaths. Less money for SNAP might also result in deaths. The bill would have far more targeted relief checks, whatever the hell that means. We are told by administration sources that a bill of this sort might be in the $600 to $800 billion range. I don't know who the sources were in the administration. For all I know, it could be Neera Tanden. I mean, it could be somebody who's on the right wing of the administration, not reflecting Biden's opinions, at all. Just to say something here, the checks and shots strategy would suggest that you do put forward a skimpier funding bill right now, put it on the floor next week. But the skimpier funding bill for checks and shots, according to Dave Dayen, would total more like $1 trillion than 600 to 800 trillion dollars, because it would involve the $2,000 checks for everybody. And but Dave believes, and I do too, that there's enough support to get 60 votes for the $2,000 checks. If Marco Rubio will vote for the $2,000 checks, a lot of right-wingers on the Republican side are going to vote for the $2,000 checks. They're not going to say no to $2,000 checks. And they're not going to say no to vaccine stuff and coronavirus either. It's only the centrists who will do that, because they love austerity no matter who it kills. But the real rightists on the Republican Party know austerity is a plot, and that it's a plot against them too, and they don't like that. So this is an opportunity, perhaps, for Democrats to get the checks and shot strategy implemented with a single bill passed beginning February 8th, put on the floor next week, passed as soon as the Senate comes back. I'm not sure what was coming back February 8th. It might be the House. I'm not clear, on the timelines now. But, I'm sorry. The impeachment trial starts on February 8th. They're coming back as of Monday, February 1st. And so a bill could be passed but during next week. If a bill is put on the floor in accord with the checks and shots strategy next week, it could be done. So the Biden administration should not get too cute with this, and it should not go for this targeting crap. It should target on the coronavirus relief on the healthcare side, and coronavirus Okay, and also the economic relief, okay, from the coronavirus on that side. If they do that, they can probably pass a $1 trillion bill with 60 votes, and they won't have to use any of their reconciliation bills. They have 2 reconciliation bills they can use in fiscal 2000, okay, and 21. Okay. Because there's a reconciliation bill that was left over from the fall of 2020, which is still fiscal 2021. Okay, and there's another one that can be used when fiscal 2022 starts in October. So they would not have to use either of the 2 reconciliation bills that they can possibly pass this year, but they could still pass the $1 trillion coronavirus checks and shots bill. That can be done. Under that approach, the Biden administration would take everything that's left out of the skinny relief package and add it to Biden's Build Back Better plan. Notice this. The $1.9 trillion plan has in it roughly $1 trillion for the checks and shots and $900 billion for the rest. So it might actually be the case that the reconciliation bill, in the end, might even be smaller than the original checks and shots bill if they play this right. But I'm not entirely clear on these details, so that, okay, is just a hunch. It might also be the case that if they pass the checks and shots for $1 trillion, they wait till March to pass the reconciliation bill, that then that reconciliation bill could be even larger, because we need more than the $1.9 trillion. We're probably going to need a total of $3.5 to $4 trillion in relief before we're through. So far, we've only got $900 billion from the December bill that has been passed. So there's still $3.5 trillion to go. So the reconciliation bill should probably be another $2 trillion. And these 2 bills together should probably be in the $3 trillion range. Anyway, that covers that one. I'm not going to say too much more. The text of the letter from the CPC, okay, is in here. And the CPC actually cites the study I went over last night by Adam Hirsch, okay, and Adam Hirsch and but also Mark Paul. They co-authored the study. They were the ones, okay, who estimated that from $3 to $4.5 trillion was going to be needed in short-term relief to get our economy out of the hole. So over the next 6 months, okay, or so, that's when the $3.5 trillion, okay, is needed. So if we pass an upfront checks and shots bill for $1 trillion, and then we pass a $2 trillion reconciliation bill, that begins to get us there. And if something more has to be done, there's another reconciliation bill that can be passed in October. But the other $1.5 trillion bill that could be passed in March would probably get us to October, when the other reconciliation bill could be passed. That's assuming they don't get rid of the filibuster. So the text of the letter is here, okay, if you're interested. Okay, I have the link. They do refer to the groundwork study that I went over yesterday. So I'll stop sharing this now and go on to the next relief article. And this was one there are two of these. They're pretty short. One is about Bernie Sanders and what Bernie is doing. This was an article from Jacobin. Bernie Sanders gets it. We should all have free health care during the pandemic. And what this is about is Bernie Sanders crafting in the budget committee that he said he wouldn't use his new position as the chairperson of the committee to push for his entire agenda, including Medicare for all. But his keystone proposal for the stimulus, the Healthcare Emergency Guarantee Act, the HCEGA, is essentially Medicare for all on an emergency temporary basis. And so, if he could pass that, and that's what he plans to use the reconciliation bill for, in part, he would include it in the reconciliation bill. It would include free testing, vaccines, and treatment during the pandemic. It would be simple, comprehensive, and cost-effective. The plan would empower Medicare to pay all medical bills, including prescription drugs. Patients could go to any hospital or doctor they wanted to, free of cost. The immediate benefits to workers would be enormous. No more worrying about bills. No more choosing between health care, and other essentials. The legislation would also halt any medical debt collections, prohibit private insurance companies from increasing cost sharing, and require ongoing data collection and weekly reporting on COVID-19 related health disparities. So he's going to try to put that temporary pandemic health relief into the multi-trillion stimulus bill that he's going to try to get to the floor. That's what he's going to try to use reconciliation for. Now, if Biden goes with the checks and shots for $1 trillion, some of what Bernie was going to do in this bill would already have actually been done. But Bernie, of course, will then want to do a lot more. Perhaps even go as far as trying to propose $2,000 in monthly checks for everybody. We have to wait and see whether that occurs. But it's important to know that Bernie is proceeding with what he calls the HCEGA. And he's proceeding to try to make that the most comprehensive and cost-effective way to guarantee that everyone gets the health care they need without cost for the duration of the pandemic. So I did want to call attention to that. And now there is one more thing that I want to share before I go to your comments, and that is a very good piece by David Sirota, which appeared in Jacobin as well. And it's called Read My Lips. It's by David Sirota, Andrew Perez, and Julia Rock, all three of them from his group. This was done on January 27th. So it's a day old. The headline is Read My Lips, $2,000 checks for all. Now. So Dave makes the points. The unfolding story of $2,000 survival checks may seem like merely a tale of one proposal, one moment in time, but is a saga that almost perfectly illustrates a key change that explains much of the last 75 years of American politics. For about 50 years in the mid-20th century, the Democratic Party was the labor-anchored vehicle of programmatic universalism and tax fairness. Its most popular social programs, such as Social Security, Medicare, and public education, were eventually structured to offer universal benefits to everyone, regardless of income. And this helped to build some modicum of consensus support for the programs because everyone has skin in the game. Fairness was simultaneously championed with progressive tax policies that promoted higher levies on the rich. But the Democratic Party changed. It became an organization enchanted with the best and brightest technocrats and business neoliberals whose obsession with hair-splitting precision and corporate fealty ended up fetishizing ever more complex means testing while largely accepting tax inequity. This post-New Deal iteration of the party embraced programs that are absurdly complicated Rube Goldberg machines, contraptions like means-tested tax credits and health insurance subsidies rather than direct aid, means-tested health insurance subsidies rather than government guaranteed medical care, convoluted alphabet soup initiatives like the Home Affordable Modification Program, HAMP, rather than direct aid to homeowners, and micro-targeted spending programs rather than a broad-based social safety net. And Democratic politicians now laud themselves as populists, not for locking up white-collar criminals. They infamously refused to do that, or cracking down on corporate malfeasance. They didn't do that either. But for trying to excise the spawn of billionaires from proposals like free college. In the process, the public has learned to see their agenda as a Byzantine maze of complexity, paperwork, and bureaucracy. Development that has weakened the political consensus behind the party, in part because nobody knows for sure whether they will qualify for its programs. Taken together, the Democrats have helped create what journalist David Dayen once called a painful tax on Americans' free time, one requiring us to devote inordinate amounts of our lives trying to access basic necessities, comply with reporting requirements, and prove eligibility for benefits. Meanwhile, fairness ceases to exist as Democrats have increasingly acceded to policies that make the tax system flatter and flatter, to the point where billionaires pay a lower effective tax rate than their secretaries. Not surprisingly, as the Democratic Party made this conversion from universalism and fairness to means testing and complexity, the country lost faith in a government of ever more labyrinthine programs. At the same time, Republicans dishonestly portrayed their own seemingly simple tax cuts as the purest and best form of universalism and fairness. The result of the Democrats' politically dominant New Deal coalition disintegrated and the GOP repeatedly shellacked them in elections. This should have all been a cautionary tale. And yet, in 2021, after this multi-generational disaster has laid so much waste to everything, Democrats vaulted back into power by Donald Trump's epic failures somehow still seem intent on repeating the cycle, even on a $2,000 checks initiative that should have already taught them the opposite lesson. Late last year, at the urging of Bernie Sanders and House Progressive, Democrats were forced to break from their proclivity for complexity and issue a simple, read my lips, quote unquote, esque promise, to deliver $2,000 survival checks. Even though the proposal was itself means tested, it was still nearly universal and so straightforward that it helped Democrats win 2 Senate seats in Georgia, a longtime Republican stronghold. And yet, despite the fact that the $2,000 checks proposal is enormously popular, 84% or something popular, the party has almost immediately reverted back to form, slowly but surely trying to complicate the idea to the point where it's becoming unrecognizable, complex, and a proof point for those who believe Democrats refused to just do what they promise. In the weeks since, high-profile Democrats, from now President Joe Biden to new Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, unequivocally promised that winning the Georgia Senate races and control of the Senate would immediately produce such checks. The party leaders, its adjacent think tank infrastructure, and the elite media they worship have tried to chip away even at this simple, nearly universal idea, despite its overwhelming popularity in opinion polls. First, Biden carefully adjusted his language from saying that 2,000 checks will go out the door immediately, quote unquote, to declaring now that he will merely, quote, finish the job of getting a total of $2,000, unquote, out to people. A shift used to justify proposing new $1,400 checks instead of $2,000 checks. Democratic partisans backed him up, arguing that the promise of $2,000 checks always took into account the $600 checks authorized by Congress in December, even though the party kept pledging $2,000 checks after the $600 checks went out with Trump's name on them. That is very true. That is what happened. The $600 checks passed in the latter part of December, December 28th or 29th or something like that. Biden went to Georgia. Schumer also pronounced during the days following that, between then and the election on January 5th, they promised $2,000 checks then. $2,000 checks. Read their lips, $2,000 checks. Senator Joe Manchin has for weeks been threatening to hold up new survival checks that his constituents could really use, asserting that relief should be more targeted, an argument injected into the conversation first by discredited austerity economist Larry Summers, and then the editorial boards employed by billionaires Michael Bloomberg and Jeff Bezos. A moderate Senator Susan Collins, Republican of Maine, who backed $2,000 checks in December, is now expressing concern that survival checks could go to some people who don't need money, just a few years after she cast a key vote in favor of a GOP tax bill designed to benefit the wealthy and slash the corporate tax rate. It's really incredible what hypocrites these people are. Suddenly, there's great concern that some money might go to people who don't need it, after they designed bills specifically to give money to people who don't need it. It's so irritating and angering and just rage-producing. The dishonesty, the hypocrisy in it, the contempt for people by that stupid woman from Maine. who keeps on winning because the Democratic Party is even stupider in who they run against her. They had perfectly good Democrats up there who would have been happy to run against her with the support of the DSCC on a progressive platform, like Zachary Ringelheim and like Betsy Sweet, I think her name is. She did run. She ran in the primary against Sarah Gideon. And of course she lost because Sarah Gideon had all kinds of money from the DSCC. In the middle of that drumbeat, Biden has now completed his regression. He has morphed from a straight-talking campaigner promising immediate $2,000 checks back into his old form as a 40-year Washington dinosaur speaking incoherent Senate-ese. On Monday, Biden declared that the one simple proposal is now, quote, all a bit of a moving target in terms of the precision with which this goes, unquote, adding, quote again, there's legitimate reason for people to say, do you have the lines drawn the exact right way? Should it go to anybody making over X number of dollars or Y, unquote. What bullshit, right? It's just bullshit, right? Now comes Bezos's newspaper thundering in to help rationalize the retreat, publishing a story on Tuesday about an economic paper arguing for further means testing survival checks with a wildly loaded headline, cutting off stimulus checks to Americans earning over $75,000 could be wise, new data suggests. In past COVID-19 stimulus bills, full rounds of direct payments have gone to individuals earning up to $75,000 and couples earning $150,000. The Post story offered up a new threshold, $50,000 for individuals and $75,000 for couples. Quote, the price tag to send another round of checks to couples earning more than $75,000 and singles earning more than $50,000 would be $200 billion, yet the researchers estimate this group is only likely to spend $15 billion of that money, about 7%. That is crazy, crazy. This report was quickly touted by the Wall Street aligned think tank Third Way, the Beltway's most reliable megaphone for let them eat cakeism. Now you can be sure that Neera Tanden, from inside of the administration, I don't think she's been quite confirmed yet, but if she has, even if she has not, I'm sure she has access to them now, and she's whispering in their ears about this paper, and she's telling them that going the whole way with the $2,000 checks, very little of that money is going to be spent. I mean, these crazy researchers estimate that for couples earning $75,000, they're going to spend only 7% of that money. Are these people out of their minds? They got to be out of their minds. Three of the smartest economists around, comes from the Third Way tweet, say target stim checks to those making less than $75K. Astonishing. By economists at Opportunity Insight, which the newspapers described as a nonprofit research organization rather than a billionaire-funded think tank. Indeed, democracy dies in darkness. Yes, a billionaire-owned newspaper is using research from a billionaire-backed think tank to build a case against sending COVID-19 survival checks to individuals earning between $50,000 and $75,000 on the grounds that they are just too wealthy. This from the same newspaper whose editorial board still defends giving bailouts to Wall Street the bankers. Opportunity Insights was launched at Harvard University in 2018 with the backing of Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg's Family Foundation, which disclosed it would give $15 million to Harvard for the creation of the Opportunity Insights Institute. The organization's websites say its partners include the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Its advisory board features former Barack Obama strategist David Plouffe, who advises Zuckerberg's philanthropy, and New York Times columnist David Lenhart, who pretends to be a progressive, but who in his economics writing is an austerian. Believe me, he's all about austerity and deficit worries and debt worries. He might as well come from the Peterson Foundation. The Opportunity Insights report analyzed consumer spending data to calculate how much more high-income households, meaning households located in zip codes where the average annual income is above $78,000 per year, spent on consumer goods after the Treasury began sending out stimulus checks. According to the analysis, high-income households will spend about $45 of the $600 checks passed by Congress in December within the first month of receiving them. Of course, people didn't get them in December. They were passed by Congress in December. If they got them at all, they got them only this month. But by the way, I haven't spent one penny of my $600 checks. Of my $600 check. We've only gotten one so far. Barney's check, okay, is but still to come in. I haven't spent a penny of that yet. The reason why I haven't spent a penny of it yet is because I only deposited it in the bank yesterday.
It has Trump's name on it.
And it has Trump's name on it, Barney says. Yeah, I only deposited it only yesterday. So I haven't spent on it. Why? Because it was dated January 6th and the frickin' post office didn't even get it here.
And
until a couple of days ago.
Congress can pay for fixing the
Post office, of course. The Opportunity Insights analysis concluded, quote, based on these results, we estimate that households earning more than $78,000 will spend only $105 of the $1,400 stimulus checks they receive, implying that $200 billion of additional government spending will lead to only $15 billion of additional spending. Hey, where was the Opportunity Insights analysis? Where is the Opportunity Insights analysis calculating how much of the tax cuts that were passed by Congress for the wealthy were actually spent by the wealthy? Huh? Where is that Opportunities Insights analysis? Why is Opportunity Insights picking on the middle class and on government spending? Could it be because the great economists from Opportunity Insights don't know that a monetary sovereign can spend whatever it has to, regardless of the debt, the size of the debt, or the debt to GDP ratio? And in a situation like this, regardless of the deficit too, because consumption is down so much, and if they're going to spend so little, why bother targeting it? It's not going to get anywhere anyway. It's not going to get into the economy. It's not going to cause inflation. So if some people get a little more, does that justify complexifying the bill and delaying its passage and delaying it in time and delaying its impact on the economy? No. One of the report's authors, Brown University economics professor John Friedman, offered the Post the kind of pro-means test refrain that has defined Democratic politics for a generation. Quote, targeting the stimulus to lower-income households would both better support the households most in need and provide a large boost to the economy in the short run. If they're so interested in targeting the stimulus payments to lower-income households, why don't they do so but make those stimulus payments $2,000 a month so that the lower-income households have some security? But no. What they want to do is target the stimulus payments to lower-income households those stimulus payments can be smaller so that the boost to the economy is smaller because these idiots are worried about the size of the deficits and the debts. It is certainly true that lower income households need the money more than middle income households. That data in the report is indisputable. But lots of people are in need right now, and even the Post attempt to obscure this effectively inadvertently admits that. Quote, data indicates most people who do not need the money right away are staving the stimulus payments or using them to pay off student loan, credit card, or mortgage debt, the story says in its very last line, as if slightly reducing any of those crushing debt burdens is some sort of luxury expenditure and not a, quote, need, unquote. There are other key points that go unaddressed in the report. For example, just because an aid program may have less of a stimulative effect on the macroeconomy, that doesn't mean millions of people don't actually need the money in the face of rising costs for food, shelter, and medical care. And even from that standpoint, it isn't clear that giving people money won't help the economy if they don't spend it immediately. The Wall Street Journal reported on Tuesday that saved checks are projected to stimulate the economy when COVID-19 vaccines have been widely distributed and people have more opportunities to spend money. Exactly. Similarly, if some people can afford to hold on to their survival checks for a minute and save it for the dark days ahead, is that really the worst thing when we're all trying to live through a historic pandemic that's not going away anytime soon? And here's the lesson of Read My Lips. Democratic apologists can argue the data all they want. They can trot out the smartest academics, to declare that their means testing ideas would so carefully slice up the aid with such razor-sharp precision that it will liquefy in the pan. They can dishonestly pretend that they can't just bring stripped down $2,000 checks by legislation to the House and Senate floors and force votes on it to try to shame the GOP into submission. They can claim the filibuster prevents them from passing it, even though the party has the power to get rid of the filibuster. They can even indignantly insist that Biden pushing $1,400 checks instead of new full $2,000 checks isn't literally a betrayal because, yeah, 600 plus 1,400 does equal 2,000. Great. Congratulations on intellectually ethering a desperate population with deadpan Vulcan logic. Please clap. All of these arguments can be backed up with fancy charts, mind-numbing graphs, and impenetrable fact sheets that literally nobody outside of Washington will read. But it all misses the key point. The most exquisitely crafted, actually arguments from Washington know-it-alls, academic experts, smug pundits, and emoji-wielding Twitter mobs will not save Democrats from a voter backlash if they fail to deliver on their simple promise. Just like George H.W. Bush's technocratic arguments about budgets and taxes didn't save him from a voter backlash after he issued his simple Read My Lips pledge and then violated it. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez seemed to be one of the only people in Congress to understand this political axiom when she responded to Biden's post-election proposal by declaring, quote, $2,000 means $2,000. $2,000 does not mean $1,400, unquote. The political truism is indisputable. Do everything you can to try to try to deliver what you promised or expect to pay a political price. That's an especially relevant maxim for someone like Senator Warnock, who was elected on an explicit $2,000 pledge and will be up for re-election in less than 2 years. And Warnock's pledge is repeated, in a tweet, which is quoted with a graphic saying, want a $2,000 check? It's in a graphic. Vote Warnock is in the graphic. And there's a treasury check depicted for $2,000, not for $1,400. And what he said on the campaign trail with respect to Loeffler, at Kay Loeffler isn't in D.C. fighting for a $2,000 relief check. She's on the campaign trail, trying desperately to save her own job. She's fighting for herself. I'll fight for you. And below that is the graphic with the $2,000 check, treasury check, and the hashtag vote Warnock. Of course, there is the anti-demagoguery argument insisting that just because a proposal like $2,000 checks is popular in the moment doesn't mean it's worthy, of enactment. But that misunderstands longer-term implications for the more than justifiable cause of both immediately helping lots of people and rebuilding social cohesion in America. By definition, the more universal a program, the more people have a stake in a policy. This is the principle that has generated transpartisan support for programs like Social Security, Medicare, and public schools. Yes, those programs are available to the 0.1%, the top 0.1% of income earners who don't need them. But that is the small price we pay for the rock-solid political consensus that has protected the programs from politicians and ideologues who want to destroy them. The same principle is at play right now. At a moment when extreme partisan polarization resulted in a violent insurrection at the U.S. Capitol, a little bit of universalism could signal that, yes, government leaders can actually deliver on their promises and make simple, straightforward, and material benefits available to most people in the country without burying them in paperwork, hassle, red tape, and confusion. This is a principle Biden, of all people, should understand. While he mostly ran a Seinfeldish campaign about nothing, he does genuinely seem to crave unity, and the initiatives that tend to be the most unifying are the ones that are, universal. But he's clearly caught between his stated desire to unify the country and make bold change and his competing obsession with Washington bipartisanship. And sorry, he can't have both. He's going to have to choose, and the wrong choice will be disastrous. And of course, Dave Sirota and his colleagues are saying the wrong choice is to go for Washington bipartisanship and not to go for universalism and for making benefits available to everybody, for using the monetary sovereign power of the federal government to benefit everybody. That's the way to get support. That's the way to win again in 2022 and to win again in 2024. And if I can be forgiven for going back to an old New Deal maxim that was offered, I believe, in the late 1930s by Harry Hopkins, if I recall correctly. He offered the formula for Democrats: tax and tax, spend and spend, elect and elect. That was the formula he offered. It worked back then. Now, right now, what we should probably do is spend and spend, elect and elect, and eventually, down the road, tax and tax, after we've built up the political capital to tax and tax the rich who currently pose a threat to our democracy. And now I will consider your comments. Okay, Joanne is here. Hi, Joanne. She signed up for a vaccine this week. Let's see how long it takes. And Mustafa Hajimar says, hello, everyone. Steve Wolfbrand says, good evening. Kay says, hi, Steve. And Deck said, my son and son-in-law used to work for GameStop. Whoops. Steve Wolfbrand says, hi there. Deborah says, wonder what the WS and the administration will do in response. Remember, Chelsea's buddy is a hedge fund manager. I suppose W/S is Wall Street. Chelsea's hubby is a hedge fund manager. Yes, he is. Elaine McForbes says hi. Hi, Elaine. And Deborah says, Glenn Greenwald was excellent on this matter. GameStop as well. I subscribe because he is great. I do too. I think he's great too. But I thought his piece was a little too long for tonight because I had quite a number of others to go over. So it was really a choice between going with his piece or going with 3 or 4 others. And I decided to feature others. So Dia Swift is here a bit late tonight. Greetings, Joe, Barney fans and supporters. Steve Wolfbrand says, hiya, Dia. And Steve Wolfbrand says, AMC is next. Steve says, hedge funds are job killers. They are. And Steve said, I did work with Occupy LA, good times. Yes, this was kind of an Occupy LA and Occupy everywhere that Wall Street is. And Deborah Wilson said, could this at long last be the thing, the outrage, the shutting down of the stock buying apps due to the triumph against the vultures on Wall Street that brings the people together against the 1%? I sure hope so. And Lana says, also late was on a conference call with Shahed. What did Shahed Buttar have to say, Lana? Harrison Jordan says, Joseph M. Firestone talking about GameStop. This is the stuff I live for. Inject this into my veins, says Harrison Jordan. Hi, Harrison Jordan. Not sure who you are, but okay. Sandy Degg says, amazing. Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Deborah says, Joe will side with them, Joe Biden. I hear he already has an overheard phone call instructing Robinhood to put a halt on its individual traders of these certain stocks. Steve says, can't stop laughing. Steve Gonzo sent an icon of some sort. And Lana Dell said, I like Dave D. Dave D is really wonderful. And Dave S. is really wonderful too. Dave Sirota is really wonderful too. I certainly like the Davids. And Lana Dell says, I don't like Doug Henwood. Yeah, I know he wrote a piece that was critical of some of the Democratic Socialists, okay, on Jacobin, I think, wasn't it? And Steve Gonzo says, remember when senators got coronavirus briefings before the public and sold off millions of dollars in stocks before the crash last year and faced no consequences and no regulations? Then Reddit made one stock into a meme. And they're talking about restructuring the whole market. Yeah, they just love regulation when it's in their favor. When deregulation is not in their favor, then they hate it. Then they want regulation. I mean, what they're about is rigging the game. All their ideological rationalizations and justifications don't count worth 2 cents. They're just game riggers. Game riggers. If they're going to rig the game, we got to take over and rig the game against them. That's what democracy really has to be about. Deborah says wrong. People who are gamers still shop at GameStop for their gaming hardware replacement parts, even if not so much for the video games. There is still a demand for their products. Good. Steve Wolfbrand says exactly. Kay says GameStop equals jobs. And if it can survive, I suspect it's going to equal jobs again. Steve Wolfbrand says hedge funds taking advantage of COVID suffering, GameStop, AMC. And AMC will be able to be profitable again too. As soon as we can, we're going to flock to the movies again, if we possibly can. Sandy says, true, my son's store was always crowded. Lots of parents bring their kids in. They would have all kinds of advanced sales, and they were getting into collectibles. Steve Wolfbrand said, "We are all learning. It's a casino. The house always wins, except this time." Which now, of course, they call for regulation, for rigging the house even more in the house's favor. Sandy Degg says, "I feel a movie is coming out next year, laugh out loud." Steve says, "Hopefully some day traders made a killing." Yes, some of them did. Some of them did. Sandy says, but they can show it at the AMC. Steve Wolfbrand says, "Ironic." And Rahul Majumdar says, "Working class speculation is still speculation. Still won't shed any tears for a hedge fund that collapses after Reddit Gate." Yeah. Well, they did collapse. They basically were taken over by some of the other big players in the area. So Gabe Plotkin could go work for them again. And Lana says, "Why would they freeze the purchases?" They would freeze the purchases because the Redditors were using purchases to drive up the price and to hurt the short sellers. That's why they froze the purchases, because they didn't want things to be driven up any higher. And Rahul Majumdar said, by Robinhood protecting Wall Street. Certainly seems that way, Rahul. Sandy says they shouldn't be allowed to stop the sale of stock. They didn't totally stop the sale of stock. What they stopped was sales going through their platform. Actually, they didn't stop the sale of stock. They stopped the purchasing of stock. Robinhood changed their name to the Sheriff of Nottingham, says Steve Wolfbrand. Emphasis on the Nottingham. Sandy Degg says, covering their assets. Deborah Wilson says, following directions. Sandy Degg said, good, Robinhood should get in trouble for that nonsense. They will. They're going to have lawsuits. There are going to be lawsuits. And Rahul says, it's a free market for the Wall Street oligarchs. Small investors need not apply. Kay says, don't see Evelina Pont tonight. Well, maybe Evelina will check in a little while. Evidently, there were other things going on tonight that I didn't know about. Sandy Degg says it's fraud, and Deborah Wilson says, we need to learn who made that decision. I know who made that decision. It was the CEO. It was the CEO of Robinhood. He was on YouTube talking about the decision. Steve Wolfbrand said, well, Marion and Little John made a fortune. Steve Gonzo says, but Citadel has Joe Biden interests. Oh, you mean Joe Biden has invested in Citadel? Raul says, if we could have taught if only we could have taught the Capitol riots to day trade. And Steve Gonzo says Joe Biden has Citadel interests. And Deborah says Janet Yellen and Citadel sitting in a tree. Steve Gonzo says, yeah, that was it. Thanks. Thanks for all the great lines tonight, folks. Rahul Majumdar says, anyone know the name of that tax? The Tobin tax. Yeah, it's called the Tobin tax. I think that's the name. The Tobin tax. Steve Wolfbrand said, if a GameStop could stop games, how many games could a GameStop stop? Sandy Degg says, I think she's clapping. I think those icons are claps. Or maybe they're waves.
Prayers.
Sandy Degg says, no, they weren't prayers. Sandy Degg says, one giant game. Steve Gonzo says, I'm a little hungover for my birthday party. Happy birthday, Steve Gonzo. Of 1. P. Had to party 7 a.m. Laugh out loud because I have to take dog to vet tomorrow. Having a hard time getting him to eat too much. And Raul says, but forgive me if I'm jaded, if I'm jaded, read the Progressive Caucus. Well, the Progressive Caucus have been reorganizing, Rahul, and they seem much more active this year than they have ever been in the last 10 years. It is different with Jayapal in control. It is different. Let's see how different it is. The Medicare for All bill should be coming out again pretty soon. I think within the next 2 or 3 weeks. Let's see what actions accompany the introduction of the Medicare for All bill. Steve Wolfbrand says, happy belated birthday, my friend. And Rahul Majumdar says, why the F does Biden need bipartisan support now? He doesn't need bipartisan support now. It's because he somehow thinks that Democrats will be more popular in 2022 if he is bipartisan now. I don't know why he thinks that. I don't know what his theory of the case is, but I am convinced that whatever the theory of the case is, it is wrong. Nobody cares about bipartisan support who votes. What they care about is whether their own family survives or not, okay, and does well. Mine says Biden should tell schools to offer free lunches to the students when teachers.
Some teachers
Some teachers have offered to pay for these free lunches, and when they offer to pay, they get fired. So I don't know what Biden can do with an executive order when it comes to school lunches. I don't know, but it seems to me that can easily be thrown into an omnibus stimulus bill. It would be a very minor item in the huge stimulus bill that Bernie is trying to put together now. Steve Gonzo said, it's still my bad. I just had to start early, but laugh out loud. You know you're too old when you have to do the math. Steve Wolfbrand said, I had a COVID birthday party of one as well, laugh out loud. Steve Wolfbrand said, at least you got the dog. And Rahul Majumdar says, left and right versus the establishment. Indeed. Steve Wolfbrand said, shared. Steve Gonzo said, 443,769. I believe that is the total fatalities in the United States from the Worldometer site. Okay, today. And I believe we're now up to, what are we in fatalities per million, Steve? But tell me what that is now. I think we're now almost, I think we are, 300 fatalities ahead of Brazil, which only last month seemed to be within 12 to 15 fatalities per million of us. But it seems as though the deaths have stopped in Brazil, even though there's a Brazilian variant of the virus. Okay, or they're no longer reporting deaths down there in the same way they were. Steve says no stimulus relief until March. And Steve says, really? Oh my God. Well, as I said, if they do a checks and shots strategy, they can have some stimulus out within 2 weeks. They can have those $2,000 checks out, okay, in 2 weeks. And they'd be heroes if they had them out, okay, in 2 weeks. Then they can, if they went with $2,000 a month in stimulus for the broader bill, for the reconciliation bill, they'd have a tremendous amount of popular support for that. Sandy Degg says, I've made you a cake, Steve. We all can be your virtual birthday party. And Rahul Majumdar says, just target 10 Republican senators who are up for election in 2022 to get 60. Well, there are many Republican senators who evidently are for the $2,000 check. Steve says, that's nice, a virtual birthday party. Steve Gonzo, he must have had some icons there that I can't see in my interface. Raul says, well, once Medicare for All is in place, people will want it to be permanent. Yes, Bernie knows that, and he's banking on that. Sandy Degg says, if people get that health care, they're going to want to keep it. Yeah, 90% of them are going to want to keep it. Raul says, great minds think alike, laugh out loud. Sandy Deggs says, by Rahul Majumdar, absolutely. Sandy Degg says to Rahul, also laugh out loud. Steve Wolfbrand says, I'm going to send Steve a picture of the Mercedes-Benz I would have given him if it wasn't the virtual party. And Kay says, Bernie's still trying his best to work for the people. Kay says, means testing sucks. And Steve Gonzo says, bam, by Margera, jackass, left his keys in his Bentley, and it was predictably stolen. I don't know who that is. Kay says, I get to go through all that means testing, but joy to reapply for food stamps next month. Hate it. And Rahul Majumdar says, Senator Manchin, and frowns. Kay says, it would be cheaper and way easier to just give people enough to live on from Social Security. Yeah. Steve says, Steve Wolfbrand says, 600 wasn't even half my rent. Well, I don't live in Los Angeles, and it wasn't half my rent either, Steve. Sandy says, Biden runs true to form. Kay says, I spent half of that on 2 pairs of new glasses, so maybe I can see again. And Rahul Majumdar says, the main Democrat, Kay, was a neoliberal. That's why Collins won. Yeah, I know Sarah Gideon was a neoliberal. Zach Ringelheim, though, is not a neoliberal. Betsy Sweet, okay, was not a neoliberal. But Zach Ringelheim, okay, is an MMTer. He ran against, he actually got the nomination, okay, the Democratic Party in 2018. But he ran against Angus King, who everybody loves there because, he's so independent. And they evidently don't have the education up there to realize that he's a neoliberal and not good for them. And he's one of the senators who's sitting on the Gang of 16 and who's always worried about the deficit and the debt. And Steve Wolfbrand said 75,000 ain't much in LA. It ain't much in the Washington, D.C. area. It ain't much in New York City. It ain't much in Atlanta. It ain't much in Chicago. It ain't much in San Francisco. It ain't much in Seattle. It ain't much in Portland. It ain't much in most of the cities of the United States. Sandy Degg says it's not a lot in New Jersey and New York City. Steve Wolfbrand says, no, for that matter, 2,000 is not a lot in those areas. Steve Wolfbrand says no one should be a billionaire. What we need, no, I'm not going to say it. Anyway, Rahul Majumdar says, but philanthrocapitalism equals austerity. Sandy Degg says the whole thing is sickening. Sandy Degg says, our checks are going towards our health insurance. And Steve Gunn says, see the NERA HRC pointing housewives mean with Bernie mittens holding the white cat? No, I didn't see that. Kay says, Sandy Degg, we need single payer. Sandy says, yes, we do, Kay. DSS. I'm surprised they sent you guys proper checks. Everyone that I know that has a bank account got their directly deposited in the first week of $600 check approval. I don't know why. They have our bank information. I don't know why they didn't send it to us directly, why they sent us the paper checks. They have our banking information from way back. I don't understand. Raul says, boosted the economy. These are survival benefits to avoid destitution. That's true. Steve Wolfbrand says, how about that Bitcoin guy that has 220 million in Bitcoins, but can't remember his password? I can't stop laughing. He has 10 chances. He's on number 8. And he says, I can't remember, but shit either. Yeah. He couldn't remember his password, and he didn't want to write it down because he was afraid somebody would steal it and get his $220 million. Kay says, my memory sucks too. Sandy says, I don't know how you can be a congressperson or senator and not know how our economy works. They should be required to take a class on it. They should be required to pass a test on it. And the test has to be designed and implemented by MMT economists.
Well, they could offer it.
MMT economists could offer such a test, but of course, you wouldn't get a congressman to touch a test like that with a 10-foot pole. Sandy says, who doesn't write down their passwords? What a dope. And Steve says, econ classes need to take an MMT class. And Steve Gonzo says, I heard BitBoy is so rich, he's not concerned. And Kay says, sadly, I see more GOP in 2022 elections. If this keeps up, me too. Sandy says, I would have written it down in how many pieces? In 10 pieces. Right. And then what you would have done, Steve, is to have hidden the 10 pieces in 10 different places. Right? And then you would have forgotten where the 10 different places are. And you wouldn't have had your password anyway. Sandy Deck says, well, if he bought Bitcoins, he can't be very bright. Well, there were some people who were not very bright who bought Bitcoins when they were selling for whatever they were at the beginning, $2, $1. They're still holding on to their Bitcoins. Every once in a while, they cash in one. Deborah Wilson says, preach, Joe. Rahul Majumdar says, Glenn Greenwald, yes, The Intercept. No. Lana Dell says, too much to write. I will talk to you tomorrow over the weekend. Okay, thank you, Lana. And Lana says, Henwood is an MMT basher. Yes, he is. And Lana Dell says, my son still shops at GameStop. Steve Gonzo says, Ohio's going back to school. Rite Aid is handling vaccine distribution. Steve Wolfbrand said, I can see GameStop going to $1,000 a share. People at work are dumping money into it. Is it really going to go to $1,000 a share? Lana says, did you hear the Janet Yellen song? No, I'm not kidding. Send me a link to the Janet Yellen song. Kay says, I listened to a live stream today about state banks. It was interesting. Yes. Steve Wolfbrand said public banks are important. Kay says, yes, Steve, I agree. And Steve Gonzo said, 79,303 per million? No, that's not the fatality rate. But for the United States, the fatality rate for the United States is something like, it's in the 1300s per million somewhere. I forget exactly what it got to today. I think it might be 1336 or 1338 per million, if I remember correctly. I looked at it not too long ago. Sandy says, in New Jersey, all students are receiving free lunches till August. Even kids who are on remote learning, parents can pack up lunches. Kids that are in school also get a free breakfast. So in New Jersey, students are receiving free lunches till August. That's great.
Yeah.
Steve Wolfbrand says, my passwords are all capital P, capital A, capital S, capital W, capital O, capital R, capital D. Hello, John Podesta. Yeah, Steve Gonzo says 1336. So I was right about that, 1336. Hey, I had it on the money. Steve Wolfbrand said they'll never figure that shit out. That must have been what John Podesta thought. They'll never figure that out. That was the first thing they put in. So, folks, I have now come to the end. I thank you for coming. I thank you for playing. I thank you for all the smart remarks. Kay says, thank you, Joe and all, for another great discussion. I love you all. And we love you too, Kay. And we do. And we will see you all on Saturday night. Hopefully, I'll get a chance to do some short takes tomorrow. Steve says good night, and Dolores says thank you and good night. And Rahul says thanks, Joe. Thank you for coming, Rahul. Thanks, everyone. And Lana says good night, Dia. And Steve says sweet dreams. Sandy says thank you. Sandy Dick says thank you, Joe and Bonnie and everyone. Good night, folks. Have a real good day tomorrow.